There were 4 of us when we broke into the Megaplex. There was Ralph, better known as Razorgore on YouTube, and Dale, better known as Drakesong. The 2 of them often do head-to-head videos on YouTube, as well as Let's Plays and other game content where they played the latest video games and titles. Jeremy, Kyle, and I were just the editing team, but we appeared on the channel often enough to be recognized. I was operating the camera that night as we came up to the back door of the Megaplex, ducking under the police tape. "What's up, Gorehounds? Tonight we have something special for you," Ralph said, trying to keep his voice pitched low and failing. "As some of you may know, the Megaplex in our area was recently closed under some pretty creepy circumstances." Ralph pulled a goofy-looking face that was probably supposed to be creepy as he looked into the camera. Dale tried to stay in the shot, looking unimpressed and striving for that too cool for this look. Kyle and Jeremy stood outside the camera, Jeremy waiting for his cue and Kyle looking around nervously. Ralph had talked us into this, and all of us were having second thoughts now that we were here. The payoff would be spectacular, but the risks would definitely be high. "For those of you who don't know," Dale said, "last week an unknown man came in for the midnight showing of Silence of the Lambs and killed 8 patrons in the theater. Many of the others escaped, but when the cops burst in, he was nowhere to be found. The theater has been closed for 2 weeks now, with no sign of the murderer. So we figured it's the perfect place to break into and play some Dead by Daylight, maybe some Friday the 13th, as we all sit in the creepy theater, isolated in the darkness." We kept saying break-in because it sounded more dramatic. In reality, Jeremy worked for the Megaplex as an assistant manager, and he had keys. I kept the camera on Ralph and Dale as Jeremy approached the employee entrance with the crowbar, so the camera could easily see him as he passed. After some grunting and exertion off-screen, while Ralph and Dale hyped up the stream, Jeremy slid the key into the lock and unlocked it with one quick, smooth twist. He gave a mighty strain and pretended to wrench the door open as he turned the handle. I turned to look at the door as it came flying open, and the 2 congratulated him as we proceeded into the dark back room of the Megaplex. I had all 4 of our laptops in a bag around my back, and I tried not to bump them together as we walked inside. I would sit in the booth and monitor the stream, collecting the video and audio from the other sessions, and piece them together into something cool that we could post on our channels next week. The creepy ambience and gameplay would play well together. It would ensure that we had something awesome for maximum viewership. I could also monitor them from the central projection hub in case something went wrong. The theater was dark, the emergency exit signs glaring garishly at us as we walked through the snack bar and into the common area. The Megaplex had 12 different theaters and would allow each of us to sit in a different one without even having to leave our fingerprints in the theater that was also a crime scene. We had toyed with the idea of having all of them sit in there, basking in the atmosphere of death as they played killers and victims. But the idea of accidentally leaving evidence behind to incriminate ourselves was particularly unappealing. We were already taking a huge risk by doing this. Mitigating risk from herein was important. "Okay, we're going to set up now," Ralph said to the camera as he stood near the entrance to the theater hallway. "See you on the other side, Gorehounds," he intoned. I switched off the camera and put down the bag as I handed out the controllers. "Okay, here's your controllers. Take any theater but 7. Jeremy, show me which one of these keys gets me in the booth again." Jeremy flipped through them until he found a longish silver one, handing it to me. "This one, and the one next to it'll get you into the projection cage. You know what you're doing up there, right?" he asked for the 1,000th time. "Hook the HDMI cables from the laptop to the projector. It's not rocket surgery, dude." "Please, for the love of God, don't unhook anything that's already hooked up to the projectors. We're playing a pretty dangerous game here already, and I don't want anyone questioning why there are suddenly wires unplugged." "I think I can handle it, Jeremy. Now you guys go and get set up so we can get started." They went towards the theater, and I went towards the projection booth. 30 minutes later, we were ready to start streaming. The software on each laptop was easy to set up, and hooking the computers to the projector was easy. Each of their audio feeds let me hear what they were saying, and let them communicate with each other through the game software. They had taken theaters 5, 6, 8, and 9, leaving theater 7 empty between them. I couldn't help but glance down into the dark theater as I worked, my eyes straying to it ever so often. The lurid red exit signs were the only light in theater 7, casting the police tape and seats in an eerie crimson glow. I cut the screens on for 5, 6, 8, and 9, seeing the theaters light up as the screens flickered to life. When the screen for 7 came on too, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I glanced out the little window that gave me a bird's eye view of the theater, and nearly dropped the laptop I'd been about to move. From my vantage point, I had a great view of the large black shape standing frozen in front of the screen. I backed away shakily, startled by the sudden appearance of the gangly shape, and bumped into the desk as I stumbled away from the frightening sight. I stood, breathing hard, as my mind raced and my brain ran over 1,000 different scenarios. Was it the killer? A cop doing some late-night investigation? A janitor? They weren't moving, so I had probably startled them as bad as they'd startled me. What if it was the killer? They had said they'd never left, hadn't they? My mind kept plodding over that little nugget as I stood motionless and felt my guts writhing in terror. I needed to get the audio feeds hooked up so I could warn them. I needed to call their cell phones so they could run. I needed to do something other than just stand here in abject terror, but that seemed to be all I was capable of doing. When he continued to stand motionless, however, I felt my fear ebb some and took another look. I realized my mistake pretty quick. The coat had clearly been left over a chair or something. The longer I looked at it, the more details became apparent, and the stranger it became that I couldn't see the arms or legs sticking out of it. I laughed when I realized I was frozen in fear by someone's leftover coat, and chalked it up to the creepy ambience of this abandoned theater. I was too jumpy. I had to keep my head in the game. I got back to work. "Mic 1, check," I asked, sitting down and testing the setup. "Check," said Ralph. I saw a little light come on in the seating area as his controller came on. "Mic 2, check." "Check," said Dale. "Mic 3, check." Nothing. "Mic 3, check," I asked, looking out into Theater 8. I didn't see anyone sitting in the dark rows of seats and started glancing around to see where Jeremy was. The screen was a solid, staticky white that covered the whole theater in a bright carpet of light. By that light, I could see nothing but an empty theater. This inevitably led my eyes over to Theater 7, and I had to double-take when I noticed something was amiss. I stood up, squinting at the chair someone had left on the little platform in front of the screen. The chair was bare now, just a silhouette behind the white screen. The coat was gone. "Sorry, Mic 3 here. I had to go to the bathroom." The coat had been there. I knew I had seen it. The ragged old coat had been sitting on a chair in front of the screen, a chair that was now empty. The hood had been up, making me think that someone had been inside it, the arms dangling out like empty scarecrows, and now it was just gone. The theater was still empty. I could see it illuminated by the screen, but the coat had vanished. "Hey, are you there? Control, come back." I shook it off and went back to my setup. "Check. Mic 4, check." "Check and check," Kyle said. I got back to the job at hand. I'd ponder that old coat and its escape act later. I would ponder that old coat a lot more than that in the coming days. I lined up their cameras so their fans could see and hear them, and then we officially started the stream. Our last stream, as it happens. "What's up, Gorehounds? I'm joined by Drake Song from channel Dragonhorn, as well as Kyle and Jeremy, regulars on the show. We're going to be playing some Dead by Daylight in the bowels of the Murder Megaplex." His head was little more than a ghostly floating specter as the camera picked it up and made him look a little ghoulish in the dim light. The screen became black as the game started. I watched as they rolled into the selection menu, the game divvying up teams and assigning the killer. I let my mind wander a bit as I monitored the stream. The boys were enjoying themselves, yelling and screaming whenever the killer would sneak up on them. They had played 3 games, Jeremy taking the killer role twice, when someone in the comments started trying to get my attention. This was pretty typical behavior. Most of these guys were attention whores, and they wanted to make the highlight reel at the end of the video where we showed great comments or funny moments. This guy, despite the ridicule he was getting from the others in the comments section, was not letting up, and that drew my attention. "There's a shadow behind Kyle," he said. Then a few minutes later, "Seriously, someone is sneaking up behind Kyle." 5 seconds after that, he posted, "Someone get Kyle's attention. Someone is coming up behind him." I looked at the camera feed, but saw nothing besides Kyle's face lit by the ghostly light of the movie screen. The game was the kind that favored a very muted color palette, and it had bathed the theater in a murky tone. I looked back to chat and saw that the guy was still yelling about someone coming up behind Kyle, telling him to watch out. I looked back at the feed and nearly fell out of my chair as a momentary flash of lightning in the game lit up the whole theater. I had seen someone poised behind him for a bare second, a black-clad figure in a long, ratty coat that I remembered all too well. I keyed up Kyle's mic and told him to watch out, but he didn't move. Instead, he just continued to look at the screen with that same frozen look of concentration he'd been wearing all night. Kyle had always had this intense look when he gamed, his expression somewhere between concentration and catatonia. I could see the silhouette of the man behind him, but it too was stationary and unmoving. When his feed cut out abruptly, I realized he'd been frozen for about 5 minutes. I looked out into the theater and could see Kyle still sitting there, head bent a little. His character was standing still. Ralph strolled by with the Reaper and killed him, dropping him with an easy swipe of his sickle. "Oh, tough break, Kyle. You hit a lag spike or something?" Kyle said nothing. I glanced out at the theater Ralph was in and saw that he was alone in the murky blackness. Ditto for Jeremy, and ditto for Dale. I assumed that the figure was still in the theater with Kyle, so maybe I had time to warn the others. It occurred to me that this might all be an elaborate prank, but surely they would have told me if it were, right? Otherwise, I might call the cops, which would draw attention to our stream and cause us to have to leave. I keyed up Ralph's mic so the others wouldn't hear me. "Ralph, we've got a problem." "What's up, homie?" Ralph asked, and I could hear the theater speakers booming in the background. "Something's going on. There's someone in the theater with Kyle, and now he won't respond. He hasn't moved his character, and I can't raise him on the headset. I think something's happened to him, but I need you to tell me if this is some kind of prank." Ralph was quiet for a second before chuckling kind of weirdly. "I don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about, homie, but if you're trying to run a prank here, it's not funny. It's creepy enough in this theater all by itself. I don't need to think about some creeper roaming around in the dark. Look, I'm telling you, this looks like..." But then I looked out into his theater and I felt my next words stolen from me. Someone was standing in the aisle a few feet from Ralph's seat. Someone who was holding a crowbar that was dripping wetly. "Ralph, behind you!" I yelled, but by the time he turned, it was too late. Ralph cringed against the seat in front of him as the hooded figure lunged with the upraised tool. I watched as his controller spilled to the floor, the assailant smashing him across the face with the dripping instrument. He rode him to the ground, Ralph looking dazed as he fell. The tool came up with each swing in a theatrical, horror movie fashion, sending out sprays of blood that coated the seats. The figure rose once he'd finished, and I could almost feel his eyes on me as he looked up to the projection booth. I backstepped to the computer and keyed up the other two mics. "Dale, Jeremy, you guys need to come to the projection booth right now." "Why?" Dale asked. Someone just killed Ralph." "What?" Jeremy asked, and I could hear him standing up. "He beat him to death with a crowbar. We need to get the hell out of here, right now." "Agreed. Dale, you and I should head for the emergency exit in the theater while..." But there was a sound like someone tripping over carpet. I heard Jeremy's mic go dead, and a quick look showed me his feet being dragged behind a row of seats. I heard wind passing by Dale's mic as he ran for the exit. I could hear him hyperventilating a little, and as I watched, I could see him running for the glowing exit signs. I could also see the figure step out in front of him from a row of seats and bash him with the crowbar, knocking him sideways into the other row of seats. I backed away from the window then, starting to hyperventilate myself. This was crazy. How could they have gotten Dale and Jeremy at the same time? Was there more than one killer? How had they gotten this far? Had they been waiting for us this whole time? I shook myself out of my daze and decided that I needed to go. I looked at the equipment on the table and decided to leave it pretty quick. It would slow me down, and who really cared if the police found it? I was getting ready to report this the second I got outside anyway. I glanced through the projection hole one last time, checking to see if anyone was in the theater, and finding no one below. That was when something slammed into the projection room door, and I fell on my ass. I scuttled back against the wall, eyes glued to the door that was being violently rammed from the other side. Whatever it was slammed into the door a few more times before it rattled the handle and found it locked. I was suddenly glad I'd remembered to lock it, and I patted my pocket for my phone. I decided to go ahead and call the police. They could book me for trespassing right after they saved my life. It wasn't until I'd patted myself down a half a dozen times that I remembered I'd left it on the table next to the laptop. That was also when I realized that the banging had stopped. I crept on hands and knees towards the desk, praying the phone hadn't fallen. The silence was deafening in the wake of the explosive pounding. I kept glancing at the door as I crawled, expecting that any minute the door would burst open. I was afraid to look over the edge of the table, fumbling in vain as I tried to find my phone. That's when I heard a truly chilling noise, the last noise I ever expected to hear. The sound of keys being thrust into the lock, and the door being opened with a simple turn of the knob. I sat huddled beneath the table as a hooded figure wandered into the office. He was tall, his face hidden under the blackness of that dark covering, and his feet echoed off the floor as he stalked towards me. I tried to back up further. My back smashed the metal legs of the table as I came up short. I felt my legs tremble as I shook, and I closed my eyes as I expected to die very messily. I opened them again when I heard the laughter from the doorway as Ralph and Dale came through the door with their cameras in hand. "Oh man, we got you so good," Ralph laughed. "He bought it hook, line, and sinker," said Dale. "Another classic prank." I couldn't believe it. This had all been some stupid prank for their channel. I watched as the killer doubled over and started laughing too, his crowbar dropping with a plastic thunk to the ground. When the hood came down, I saw it was Titus, our sometimes roadie, when we took our shows on the road. Jeremy leaned in the doorway, laughing uproariously, as the others high-fived and congratulated themselves on scaring me half to death. I wanted to be mad, but I found myself laughing out of pure nervous relief. You jerks," I breathed, accepting Titus's offered hand. "You really scared the crap out of me." I slapped Titus on the shoulder. "How the hell did you get across 3 theaters in a matter of seconds anyway?" Titus looked confused at that. I didn't. I snuck into Ralph's theater through the fire door and waited for you to notice me. Then I ran out after you turned away, coming into Dale's theater and catching him as he tried to escape." "I pretended to drag myself behind the seats," Jeremy said. "And Kyle?" Titus was still laughing, but he looked a little confused. "What about him? We didn't even tell him about this prank. You know Kyle's a blabbermouth. He'd have never been able to pull this off." That made me pause for a minute. "Where is Kyle?" I asked, not seeing him and really being concerned about that for the first time. Ralph and Dale looked at each other. "Dunno. No way he's still in that theater." I looked down from the box, and sure enough, Kyle was still in the theater, unmoving and not playing the game. We tried to raise him through the mic again, to no avail, and after thumping on the glass window for a few minutes to get his attention, we decided to go see what was going on with him. The 5 of us came down the stairs and crept toward Kyle's theater. The door creaked ominously as Jeremy pushed it open, and I could see Kyle's head framed by the white screen as he sat upright, staring forward, and I moved inside to go see what was up with him. I came up behind him, pausing as I caught sight of something I hadn't seen before from my high vantage point. I didn't need to touch him to realize why he wasn't going to answer me, and they all drew close as I took a few balky steps back. There was a machete sticking through the back of the chair, pinning him to the seat. When the others saw him, they all started freaking out, talking all at once as we tried to figure out what to do next. Ralph wanted to call the police. Jeremy wanted to get the hell out of the theater and then call the police. Dale just wanted to be out of the theater. We all kept trying to talk over each other, our terror rising as we kept stepping on each other's conversation. That's why it took so long to realize that Titus was gone. We looked around for him, but no one could remember if he'd come into the theater with us. The last time anyone had seen him was in the projection booth. That seemed to be the deciding factor for Dale. He had his phone out, dialing 911 before anyone could say anything about it. Jeremy slapped it out of his hand, though, and the 2 of them stared at each other in surprise. Jeremy seemed as surprised by what he had done as Dale was to have his phone slapped away. It bounced under a nearby seat, and the 2 of them just stood silently for a few seconds before Dale asked him what the hell he thought he was doing. "I don't want to be involved with this. If you call the cops, I'm going to lose my job." "Screw your job," Dale yelled. "At least one person is dead." "Let's just leave first. We can get outside and then call them. You 2 can stay and say that this was your idea, and I can..." Dale was dropping to his hands and knees, looking for his phone under the seat. "Man, that's some cowardly shit. One of our friends is dead, and you're worried about losing your job. Man, I can't believe I ever..." His words were cut off, though, when someone drug him under the seat, and he started screaming. We scattered as Dale screamed, all 3 of us flying like quail, as we tried to put as much distance between ourselves and the killer as possible. I had my phone out as I left the theater, dialing the number for emergency services as I went. I vaulted the concession counter and hid behind it as the line buzzed and buzzed. I sat there shaking, the smell of old popcorn and aged soda in my nose as I waited for someone to pick up. 911, what is your emergency? I sighed, glad to hear someone outside of this place. I told them I was at the Megaplex and that I needed the police there immediately. I told them how we had used Jeremy's keys to get inside, how we were planning to set up a stream and play games in the creepy theater, how they had pulled a prank on me that had started all of this. I told her about Kyle and Titus and about all my friends who were probably being murdered right now that we had split up. and I told her once again that I needed help. I felt the tears roll down my face as I started to cry. She assured me that help was on the way, but that I needed to stay on the line. That was when someone kicked the counter from the other side, and I practically threw my phone in surprise. I could hear the lady on the other end calling my name, seeing if I was there, but my phone had landed against the opposite counter, and my attention was dominated by a hulking figure standing over me. The bar came up to his waist. The guy was nearly 7.5 feet tall, and dressed in cast-off clothes and a long coat with a hood. He was holding the crowbar, his sightless face looking down at me, and then he smashed the crowbar against the glass, and I felt drops of something splatter across my face. I wiped them off and saw the red streaks on my fingers, realizing that his crowbar was splattered with blood. For a moment, we just stared at each other, his featureless face glowering at me. I couldn't see him glowering, but I could feel it as he glowered at me in disapproval. I had come into his den, his hunting ground, and now I was his prey. He turned, taking a step towards the opening that would let him behind the counter, and I weighed my escape options. I could try to vault the counter, but it seemed likely that he would catch me before I got to the door. If I sat right there, I'd get killed in short order, but if I sprinted for the area behind the concession stand, where the door was we'd come through, he might not be able to catch me in time. This seemed like my best course of action. He would likely still get me before I got to the door, but it was my only hope of escaping. The choice, however, was made for me. He had just stepped into the space between the counter and the back when the blue lights framed him up, and he looked at the big glass door in front of the building. He broke and ran for the back of the megaplex then, back towards the theaters, back towards whatever nest he had made for himself back there. The cops found me behind the counter a few minutes later. A search of the megaplex turned up the rest of my friends, or what was left of them at least. Each of them had been killed. They had been stabbed or bludgeoned or just strangled with the bare hands of that imposing shade. I was the only survivor, it seemed, and the police were very interested in getting my statement. That's why I'm here in this interrogation room, filling out this report. They haven't talked about criminal charges yet. I think they figure I've suffered enough. What they want is my complete report on the happenings of this evening. You can be certain that I'll never forget the events of tonight's stream. The last stream of my career, very likely. Hey, folks, and welcome to the show. It's ya dude, the unconquerable Wafflesaurus Gamer. Today, I've got a real treat for you. As far as jobs go, flying free to Japan to edit footage was pretty good. I had been the other half of my best friend's YouTube channel for nearly 2 years now, his dedicated editor and sometimes cameraman when the need arose. Travis, or Wafflesaurus Gamer, as he was known on YouTube, had a fairly popular Let's Play channel, in which he played everything from the shiniest new games to the oldest retro titles to the most ghastly train wrecks the internet has to offer. He had a modest fan base that seemed to like his Logan Paul-esque style, and the guests he had from time to time were entertaining enough to hold the attention of an 8 to 25-year-old demographic. 2 weeks ago, though, someone had sent him a weird one. The guy claimed to be from the outskirts of Japan, said he and his brother had gone to a game parlor with a reputation for obscure titles. They had gone to play a game that had been stirring up rumors in their little town, a game called Your Corner of Hell. The writer said very little was known about the game, but some kids in the village were supposed to have gone crazy or killed themselves because of the things they had seen in the game. The two had, of course, wanted to play this mysterious game. The owner had heard their request, money had changed hands, and the guy and his brother had been invited to the back of the arcade to play the game. The older brother had gone first. The room had a one-occupant rule, and the younger brother waited for a while his brother played for what seemed like hours. We went into the arcade at 10:30, just as they opened, but my brother didn't come out of that room until well past dark. The younger brother had sat for around an hour before boredom brought him back into the arcade. I spent several hours playing the machines, down to the lint in my pockets, and still he hadn't come out. As the sun went down, he heard a commotion near the front. The owner was carrying someone over his shoulder and shouting at the younger brother to get lost. The owner shoved him from behind, his meaty hand moving him easily. When the younger brother was on the sidewalk, the owner had tossed the thing that he'd been carrying onto the pavement and shuttered his shop up for the night. The thing he had been carrying turned out to be the boy's older brother. He was unconscious. The doctors say he's in some kind of coal mine. He may never recover. The owner denied that he'd ever even seen us, of course, and he has some kind of connections that keep the police from investigating him too closely. I know you play weird games, and I hate to bring you into something like this, but could you please go and try to find this game? The man at the parlor will let you in the back if you tell him Lilith sent you. Please, if you can find out what my brother saw, maybe they can help him. And now, here we were, standing outside the shabby arcade. We had flown into Hiroshima and taken a train out to the town of Tomonoro so we could meet the younger brother, a 15-year-old named Hisu. He recounted the tale to us as we sat in his mother's kitchen and drank some strong tea. The boy's hands had trembled as he spoke, and he seemed on the verge of tears as he retold his story. My parents are at the hospital with Ichi, praying that he will recover. He was supposed to go to university this year, but now it's unlikely that he will ever recover. The kid's English was pretty good, but when Travis asked if he wanted to come with us, I didn't need words to read the terror on his face. I haven't been back since the incident. I won't go near it again. A lot of kids in the village won't go there anymore either, not after what happened to Ichi. He wished us luck and said that he would pray for our return. Standing outside the grungy arcade, I didn't see what all the fuss was about. The facade was filthy, ivy hanging from the canopy, and bars installed over the dingy windows. The dust on the windows looked like you could have written in it, and the spiderwebs in the corners looked old enough to have seen the Reagan administration. The door was a black, gaping mouth with a roll-down shutter that would lock at night. As we stood, I could hear the beeps and plinks from inside, the familiar sounds of Pac-Man and Street Fighter, and the sounds were comforting somehow. Even in this foreign land, the sounds of familiar games could bring me comfort. "So, got everything hooked up?" I asked, going over his setup one more time. His glasses were set up with a pair of digital recorders that were damn near undetectable. As he recorded, the camera feed would be continuously uploading to the cloud. I could pick through the footage later and edit it into something usable for the channel. Since I couldn't come with him, he would have to record his events as he saw them. I was mostly on location to call the police if anything weird happened. A few local kids may not pique the police's interest, but an American tourist with 500,000 sub count might make them a little more willing to investigate this place. It made me feel like a real reporter, working in the field to expose the truth. How quickly we forget that those people, too, can die. "It's as ready as it'll ever be. Let's see if there's anything to see," Travis said, a big grin spread across his face. We walked into the building that was awash with blinking lights and a cacophony of sounds. Children of all ages were hunkered over the blinking machines. Others were running around and laughing as they tried to find their favorite games. I could hear the wooden chunk of a skee-ball machine, the metallic clink of an air hockey table as the puck zipped around the smooth surface, the hollow boom of a shooting game, and the pop tunes of Dance Dance Revolution. The owner had a modest collection of classic arcade cabinets as well, and even at a glance, I could tell that this was a place that made money. Standing behind the counter, looming like a monster amidst the brightly colored prizes and flashing signs, was a giant, grinning man. He was easily 7 feet tall, and nearly as wide. He had an oily mustache that sat under a bulbous, greasy nose, and his eyes were like a mean-spirited pig that loves to snap at curious children. He reminded me of a picture book I had owned as a child, Puss in Boots, and how the ogre had made me feel scared. The warty ogre had sat on his cushion in his beautiful clothes and looked down at the cat as it wove its lies. Even as a child, I had thought the look made him look menacing. It was a look that said plainly the cat was in danger of being devoured. The man spoke to Travis in what I assumed was Japanese, a language I was not familiar with, and Travis spoke back to him with relative ease. The man smiled, showing several blackened teeth, and spoke to Travis in English, though this English sounded more like European than actual American English. "Ah, an American. So word of my special game has spread that far, eh?" "Infamy more like it," Travis said. The man's smile looked a little off after that. "You'll need to sign a waiver if you'd like to play. After the last incident, I really must protect myself from further accusations." Travis scanned the document, looking for traps, and I asked the owner about the game. "What is it that seems to be making your customers react so badly?" "Well, there are the usual rumors that surround the game. The creator died, his spirit haunts the game is actually a portal to hell, Many strange rumors surround my little shop, but I can assure you that the game is just a regular game, nothing special that need elicit such reactions. Travis had finished signing the paperwork and was ready to see this game. Only one of you at a time, boys. You'll have to wait out here, he said, pointing a dirty finger at me as Travis stepped behind the counter. The last time I saw Travis, he flashed me a peace sign and smiled with a big grin. See you on the other side, he intoned. Then he disappeared into the shadowy back room as I remained in the world of flashing lights and familiar sounds. I turned away from the counter and found myself drawn by the brightly colored lights and the machine's electronic blare. I spent some time playing familiar games: Tekken, Marvel vs. Capcom, Time Crisis 2, House of the Dead. I took a spin at Initial D, a very intuitive racing game, and had my ass handed to me by a local kid at Street Fighter 2. These same kids then talked me into playing Dance Dance Revolution with them, and I had a blast as I tripped along to several of the fast and bubbly songs they picked. I lost track of time for a while, enjoying myself, enjoying the company of kids half my age who didn't speak a word of my language. When a shadow fell across us, though, their smiling faces curdled and they scattered like birds. I looked up from some unpronounceable game that hadn't made it to America and found the owner standing over me, two large men flanking him. He looked angry, his face wooden yet still smiling, and he told me to get my things and leave. I was shocked. Was he kicking me out? Had I violated some unknown rule? I had easily spent $50 in this place, and the idea that he was here to pull me out made no sense. I'm here with my friend, the one in the back. I'll leave when he finishes his... He's gone. He broke a costly machine and left out the back. Now I want you gone, too, before I call the authorities. Wait, I stammered. Which way did he go? I'm a stranger here. I don't know any... But it seemed they weren't here to negotiate with me. The two large men had me under the arms in a heartbeat, and before I knew it, I was half drugged, half carried from the shop. They deposited me onto the sidewalk with a distinct lack of grace, and the owner stood in the doorway as I got up and stood with confusion. You and your friend are banned. Leave the premises before I call the authorities, he said, evenly, before slamming the shutter down in my face. That's how I came to be outside the dingy shop without Travis, half a world from home with no clue how to get back. I had no choice but to walk to the Hisawa residence. He was the only person I knew in Tamanoru, and without knowing how to speak the language, I was practically helpless. Hisawa spoke English, Hisawa knew the area, and Hisawa knew the people that lived in the village. Hopefully one of them could help me find Travis, and I could get him through whatever was going on so we could get home. Also, Hisawa had a computer, which I would need to find Travis. Travis had gone to the back wearing the glasses. The camera on those glasses had been uploading to the cloud for the past 5 hours. If I could link up with the cloud, I could watch the video he had uploaded and get some ideas of where he was going. That would allow me to find him and get us both back home. If only it had been that easy. Hisawa, it turned out, wasn't home. His house was locked up, and the lights inside were dark. He had probably gone to see his brother in the hospital, and as dusk began to set, I made my way back into town. I was looking for somewhere, anywhere with Wi-Fi, to access the videos on my phone. It wouldn't be as stable as accessing them from a dedicated connection, but if it helped me find Travis, I didn't care how I went about it. It was getting dark, and I started to worry that I wouldn't find him until morning. When the familiar arches of a McDonald's came into view, I breathed a sigh of relief. They had Wi-Fi, and after purchasing some food, I was pretty hungry after not eating all day, I plopped down in a booth near the back wall and made my way into the file program. The file was there, but the program had stopped updating about 20 minutes ago. That was weird, but if he had wandered off the signal range, it could be that the program couldn't get a connection anymore. I clicked on the file and got 6 hours worth of video. I gasped. Surely I hadn't been in the arcade that long. It didn't feel like I had been in there any time, but my stomach was empty, and I had been known to lose track of time when I was playing games. I ate as the file finished downloading. I had finished my food when a message popped up that the files were ready to view. The video began as we walked on the sidewalk. I heard myself asked if the equipment was working okay. We walked inside, spoke with the owner, and I could hear myself asking questions as Travis looked over the paperwork. He signed, followed the guy into the back, and turned suddenly to treat me to a last look at my worried face. "See you on the other side," he intoned, before turning back and walking into the dim back room. He walked past a line of overstuffed shelves to a hallway with several closed doors. Some of the doors had shadow lights beneath them, shadowy forms doing God knew what, but the man led him to a particular door and opened it with a key. Inside was a sit-down cabinet similar to the old joystick arcade games. The cabinet filled the room, and there was barely enough room to enter as Travis stepped inside. "When you're done, lock the door as you leave," the man said, his almost European tone still hanging over his voice, not like the angry one I had gotten as he threw me on the sidewalk. Then he closed the door, and Travis was alone with the softly glowing screen. The screen was large, 50 inches at least, and the words "Your Corner of Hell" pulsated across it. Travis looked for a coin slot and found none. He sat down and grasped the joystick, a single piece of plastic with no buttons or triggers. He looked around for a start button. Travis spoke to the audience, telling them that this was the game that had garnered all the hype, and he was going to see what all the fuss was about. He had just said something about not finding a start button when the screen emitted an odd static noise and bathed the room in a harsh white light. Travis snapped his eyes forward, and I had to shield my own eyes against the bright intrusion. Then the screen darkened, and Travis was staring at a bleak landscape of reds and blacks. He moved the joystick, the screen panning around, and it became apparent that he was in a cave. Travis praised the graphics, walking up to the wall and inspecting the textures. I had to admit, it was very impressive. The renderings were far beyond anything the cabinet or the screen should have been capable of. For a second, I could swear the pictures on the console were real-time. The cave walls were made of dark stone with veins of red that wound through them in arteries. The walls pulsated and moved oddly, and when he turned, there was a dim light coming from the end of the tunnel behind him. Shapes moved in that light, strangely proportioned shapes, and Travis seemed hesitant to go in that direction. After a few seconds of half-heartedly looking around, though, he discovered that this was the only route and moved his character down the tunnel. Kind of basic for a game with such well-defined graphics, but whatever, Travis grumbled as he moved up the pulsating tunnel, viewing the weird rocks around him. I heard him gasp when the tunnel roof gave way to the sky, and my own breath stuck in my throat at the sight. The sky was a deep red, the red of heart's blood, and as he took it all in, I could see bodies falling from it ceaselessly. They fell close, they fell far away, and the ones that fell close to the cave splattered on the ground with sickening realism. Travis jumped back, startled as the realistic gore splattered across the ground, and I heard him use a word that would have definitely got us demonetized if I wasn't going to edit it out later. I reached for my earbuds as a family lumbered past on their way to the bathroom, the squelching making my stomach flip over a little as it erupted again and again. I didn't want anyone to hear these sounds. Hell, I didn't want to listen to these sounds when it came right down to it. As I slipped my earbuds in, I heard Travis mumbling about the level of gore as a body landed a few feet from him and burst like an overripe fruit. He seemed more intrigued than angry, though. Then, as Travis watched the body, it got up. Its limbs popped grotesquely back into place, and the naked humanoid, bald and sexless, got up and stumbled away from the site of its landing. It ignored Travis, stumbling across the dark sand that covered the ground. I could hear Travis breathing hard as he watched, and after some hesitation, he followed it. It stumbled across the sand, jumping as the hot sand burned its feet, and as it traveled away from the cave, Travis could see it joining groups of other battered bodies. They didn't speak. They grouped out of pure instinct and shuffled along as the black sand gave way to sluggish rivers of living fire. The group seemed to shy away from the fire, and I really couldn't blame them. Something seemed to be moving within the flames, and the group of bodies seemed to know that it was something that wanted to hurt them. Travis followed them, but never joined their group. He seemed to understand that these skittish creatures, humans or not, would be a target for whatever lived here, and their group would attract a lot of attention. As if to prove that point, one of them strayed a little too close to the fire and was ensnared by an arm of living flame that dragged it into the fiery river. The group looked after him, marking his departure, but they neither mourned him or slowed. They kept moving, and I could see other groups moving similarly as Travis used the joystick to look around. What in the hell is going on with this game? Travis asked as he followed the group at a safe distance. Am I supposed to follow them? Am I supposed to strike out on my own? I don't get the point here. He decided to follow them, despite their lack of direction, and as they neared a field of sharp black grass, I saw a creature jump out to challenge them. He was average height, his skin a deep maroon, and somehow he reminded me of the shopkeeper at the arcade. He was as wide as he was tall, and he looked at the group with a broad smile on his face. It was a distinctly gobble-you-up sort of smile. It spoke to them in a strange language, completely ignoring Travis as he moved in for a closer look, and some of the creatures stepped forward hesitantly to stand near him. The rest stood their ground, unsure of the stranger or whatever he was offering. It didn't matter. The nets came flying from the grass then, and the creatures yelled in a very human way as they were captured. Some tried to flee, others were resigned to their fate, but none of them tried to fight back. They were sheep, and soon they would be rounded up and taken to wherever it was they were bound. They made piteous noises as the nets fell over them, which seemed to push Travis to action. Travis rushed at the creatures, yelling at them to get the hell away, but since he possessed no weapons, he attempted to run his body into them and stop them from taking the struggling humanoids. He bumped the creatures, foundering against them, and the creatures took no more notice of him than an ant. They had the group rounded up in no time, and when they walked into the grass with their prize, Travis followed them into that sea of blackness. Maybe I'm supposed to follow them, he said, his voice a little frantic. Maybe that's my goal? He moved into the grass like a blind man, losing the creatures almost at once. When he came out, he was alone in a dark world of black sand and endless miles. He traveled into the emptiness, unsure of where he was going. He moved aimlessly, the hellscape never changing, and the falling bodies never ceasing. Travis didn't follow them anymore, though. He seemed to think it was pointless, and as he moved deeper in, I could hear his breathing becoming frantic and unsure. The game was presenting him nothing but a vast world to explore, but he seemed unable to interact with it or alter it. There were no trees to punch, no shelters to make, no goals to accomplish, and the only constant seemed to be the moans of the falling bodies or the distant screams of the unseen. The screams would erupt distantly, sending Travis turning frantically in that direction before returning to his chosen path. He had seen no one but the creatures and the humanoids they hunted, and he was becoming a little paranoid of the big open landscape. Travis began his journey into emptiness with some commentary on the landscape, the graphics, and the game's strangeness. The farther he went into the wasteland, the more addled he seemed to become. He talked less to the audience and more to himself. At first it was just idle talk, wondering if he was going the right way or not, but slowly his speech began to descend into mumbling. The screams were starting to get to him, and I was worried that he might be losing it as his camera panned around for what felt like the 1,000th time. I fast-forwarded a little bit. His trip through the wasteland made up almost 4 hours of the total video. When he had stopped in the desert, staring at a fixed point for several minutes, I started the video and returned to his heavy, labored breathing as he stared into the distance. He sounded ragged, as though he had been slogging for hours for real, and he just stared into the distance for no reason, intent on something. Suddenly he ran towards whatever he was seeing. The camera footage was secondhand, and I leaned in as the McDonald's crowd bustled around me, trying to see what he was seeing. Whatever it was had excited him. Whatever it was had piqued his curiosity. He ran like a man possessed, stumbling in the game as he made his way over the shifting sands towards whatever lay beyond. When the first tree of the grove came into view, I thought I knew what he had seen. When I saw what was hanging from the tree, I wondered why he was in such a hurry to get to them. The grove of dark and twisted trees came looming up from the spinning air. They weren't tall, maybe 8 feet, but each of them bore a length of rope that swung from its branches. At the end of each rope was a sexless humanoid. As Travis got close, I could see the purple bruises around their necks and the boneless way they hung from the dead trees. The grove was nothing but these grotesque wind chimes, and Travis seemed less eager as he walked into it. When the first one started screaming, I cried out right along with Travis. It came as a sudden eruption in my right ear, and my sudden yelp made a couple across from me frown and look at me oddly. I apologized, turning back to the video to see Travis studying the poor creature as it twisted on the noose. It grabbed at him, speaking in a strange language that might have been English once. It held its arms out to him, pleading for relief, or for release, or something, and Travis backed away before bolting. The forest came alive then, the tortured screams and shaking trees erupting into a cacophony and fury, and Travis began to run frantically amidst the swinging horrors. He fell suddenly, tripping over a root, and when he looked up, I heard him sob audibly as his eyes fell on a single, withered humanoid. It might have once been female, but as it was, its chest was flat, its crotch smooth, and its head hairless and lumpy. As it lifted its searching, begging face to him, I could see a single half-moon scar on its cheek. She screamed and wailed just as the others had, but there was a deep longing for release in her eyes. She begged him with her eyes, cried at him with her wailing mouth, and Travis could do nothing but stare at her as she wailed into the void. "Mom?" he breathed, his voice shaky. Travis had lost his mom last year to cancer. I had known her all my life. She had made Travis and I snacks after school, drove us places in our teens, and Travis had always been so close with her that she became like a second mother to me. How many times had I seen that scar on her cheek and wondered how she'd gotten it? Her face was still as sunken as it had been in the hospital as she lay dying, and as that screaming face stared back at Travis, I saw him snap like an over-tightened guitar string. His fists came up, and he slammed them into the screen. The cabinet shook, the image shivering, but Travis was far from satisfied. He slammed his fists, he kicked his booted feet, and he screamed like a wild man as the cabinet jerked and bent under his assault. How had I not heard him? How had I been feet away, having the time of my life, while my best friend had gone through the worst trauma of his? How had I not heard him screaming? How had I not heard his fury? As the cabinet sparked and broke, I could hear him screaming the same thing again and again, and it broke my heart to hear the pain in it. "Mom! Mom! Mom! Mom!" The door swung open, and the arcade owner screamed at him, wanting to know what he was doing. Travis rushed the man, his smile now an angry gnash of teeth, and shoved him out of the way as he made a break for the back room. He turned to look at the store owner, and for just a moment, I could see the faces of those creatures that had captured the humanoids. His gnash of teeth looked like the beast's frozen grin, and I could almost hear Travis coming to the same conclusion. He bolted for the back door, and I saw him run out into the dingy alley. He looked around frantically, people on the street staring in mistrust, before taking a left turn and heading in the opposite direction we had come. He ran up the streets of Tamanoru, a stranger in a strange land, and the people on the street gave him a wide berth. He was frantic, moving like a wild animal, and when he stopped suddenly, I leaned in close to see what he was looking at. He stared, seeming to stare at his reflection in the window across the street, and the people diverted around him as he just sat there, staring. I could see his small reflection in the glass, and he looked haggard, crazed even, but his face was filled with that unhinged understanding that you sometimes see in the mentally ill. "Mom," he whispered, and without warning, he rushed across the street with the blare of car horns following him. He ran up the street, never slowing, and when he came to a familiar train station, I wondered what he meant to do. He kept calling for his mother, chasing her ghost or something else that only he could see, as people moved out of his way like he might be contagious. He ran through the platform, the rustic wooden benches looking spooky in the near dark, and the people in the loading area cried out as he jumped down onto the track. I wanted to turn away, fearing what would happen next, but I owed it to him to see his end. The train came rolling up, blowing its whistle. He ran towards it, shouting her name. "Mom! Mom!" The train whistle blared, and the people on the platform screamed, "Mom! Mom!" The train lights rolled in close, a blinding corona of light in the eyes of the camera. "Mom!" Everything went white, and then suddenly dark as the video ended. I sat back, stunned, unsure of what I had seen or what I should do. My best friend was dead, a victim of this game that I still don't understand. I watched it secondhand, so maybe it doesn't have the same effect on me, but that's little comfort in the face of my friend's violent departure from life. I have nothing now. I haven't just lost my friend, I've lost my job and my means of returning home. Travis had our tickets in his bag. He had our hotel keys in his pocket. And I'm sitting on the sidewalk of the closed McDonald's now, unsure how to proceed. I don't know what Travis saw in his last minutes of life, but I pray it wasn't his shrieking mother that hung from the skeletal tree of that damned game. All I can do is tell my story and hope that some of you will have answers. All I can do is warn you not to play this game, as enticing as it may seem. Travis would want his death to mean something. He would want his sacrifice to be more than just another Let's Play or a creepypasta. I pray that if the land in that game is real, Travis didn't become one of those falling things that came from the sky. If there is a God, I pray that he took him somewhere better. I'm a big fan of old browser games. I used to play a lot of them when I was a kid, and while most of them were buggy or repetitive, they were still a great way to kill some time while you were at school or stuck at home. I have many fond memories of sitting at the computer with my friends, laughing and showing each other games we found on random websites. So when I heard that Java was being phased out, I got to thinking about all the old games I used to enjoy, and decided to track some of them down. I went to Reddit to see if anyone knew of any of the sites that used to host these old games, since many of them were now defunct. And a few of them suggested Newgrounds, a place I was familiar with, but a few others suggested a dozen other sites. These were smaller places which made up for their lack of showmanship with a vast selection of retro games. I'd started clicking on them, basking in the nostalgia for a while and losing myself in the simple pleasures of these simple games. I mean, I was stuck at home due to quarantine, so what else did I have to do? That's how I found I Can Scare You. I read the description and really liked what I saw. It made me wonder how I'd never found this game before. I used to love the small selection of adventure games you'd sometimes find on Java websites, little maze runners or exploration adventure games, and this one had a creepy twist that I really liked. I had expected it to be a lot of poorly animated jump scares, probably some loud screams accompanied by a picture of the girl from Poltergeist, but I figured I'd try it out anyway. What did I have to lose, right? When I loaded it up, I was greeted by something very familiar. For those unaware of the concept, screensavers were used a lot back in the day to keep your monitor from freezing in place. Windows had many iconic screensavers, but one of the most recognizable was the maze you saw sprawling out before you took on the point of view of the runner, shifting around and following a set path as you tried to find the exit. This game had dropped me into a very familiar maze, with brick walls and a sand floor, and an 8-bit soundtrack trying for creepy, but was mostly just sounding spooky. It was a little different than I remembered though. The walls were black brick, like a negative copy of the maze, and covered in a bright green moss bordering on neon. The sand was also dark, and as I moved, it made that classic game crunch that meant you were walking over dirt. I could hear something like the wind in the background, and as I moved, I could see that the normal pictures on the wall had been replaced with grainy photos of people. The images were pixelated, but clearly actual photos. The strange thing was, they weren't anything like corpses or monsters or anything. They were just ordinary people. Some of them smiling, some of them looking off blankly, but all of them looking like candid shots of people from websites or the DMV or something. As I moved through the maze, I became aware of a voice that seemed to be following me. It was just a whisper at first, but the deeper I went into the maze, the louder it became. I would turn around and find the pictures were still on the wall, but whatever was making that noise was nowhere in sight. The images seemed to repeat themselves, same 10 or 12 photos again and again, and I figured they must be the staff that had worked on the game or something. It was a little creepy having them watch me as I went through the maze, but no creepier than anything else I'd seen in a game. The voice, however, was definitely getting a little nerve-wracking. I could hear it now, and it was saying the same thing over and over again in a vaguely feminine computer voice.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I turned to the game, but there was nothing behind me. The voice had sounded close, and I assumed it was the enemy of the game. It kept moving away and getting closer, always just out of sight. So I just kept moving, kept looking for an exit, kept making my way through the maze. There was always an exit in the screensaver that made the maze fall apart and made a new maze begin. When I found what I was looking for, though, it turned out to be the last thing I'd expected. I came around a corner and heard the voice getting louder again.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I turned left and found a dead end.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I dashed back and took a right instead. Then I found another dead end.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I sighed and turned around to face my fate. I guess the game was over. That's when I saw what sort of beast lurked in this maze.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
It was a grainy picture just like the others, but this one moved and was far from the bland recreations the others had been. The image's eyes appeared to be leaking blood, the mouth crunching as it blared its ceaseless words. It barreled toward me lamely, filling the whole hallway, its face twisted in pixelated agony as it crashed closer and closer.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
Despite its alarming form, it was clearly a picture of my dad's face. I backpedaled in fear, running and taking turns at random until I finally came to the dead end that I'd been looking for. It contained a single floating picture, and if this was the exit grid, I didn't know if I wanted to see what sort of maze it would generate next. The image was a crumpled body, a car accident or a hit and run, lying in the street in a squishy mass of broken flesh. It was grainy and pixelated like the others, but this one made me stop and gasp a little as I tried to make sense of it. The body's face was pointed to the sky, its mouth open and its eyes staring. As I looked at it, the blood seemed to pool around it, glistening wetly despite having no origin.
I can scare you. I can kind of scare you.
I jumped as I heard the phrase uttered right behind me, loud enough to make my speakers crackle. Suddenly my character fell over and my screen was covered in red as the screaming monster with my father's face crunched its jaws over me. I turned the screen off and pushed away from my computer, suddenly not wanting to see anymore. The last image had been the most familiar of all. It wasn't every day you got to look at your own face as you lay dying. The other pictures had been strangers, weird stock images, but the image of my father and I had been unique, and they were very jarring. The face of my father had been twisted in agony, and the eyes had been turned up in anger as the neon red blood oozed from them. My own face and body had been confused, devoid of hope, as I lay bleeding to death in a pool of my own blood. Even if the game had somehow pulled pictures from my computer, it couldn't have gotten either of those from me. No picture of my father existed that looked like that, and certainly no picture of me that looked like that existed. I closed the game and realized that at some point it had gotten dark. Looking at my watch, I realized I'd been playing the game for 3 hours. It was pushing midnight, and I shut my computer down and climbed in bed. I tossed and turned as I tried to push the image of that final horror out of my mind. As grainy and unreal as it had been, it was still a picture of me, and I was clearly dying. How did they have it? Where had it come from? Those images followed me into sleep, and they haunted my dreams all night. I found that I was running from that hellish thing in my nightmares, and it stretched and chomped right behind me. It didn't beat around the bush this time, and it dogged my heels for hours as I ran through that 8-bit hell. Right at the end, I came to a dead end and saw my own body lying on the floor, surrounded by blood. I rolled my head lamely to look at myself, moaning at a mouthful of blood as the huge dad head fell on me and turned my world red. When my cell phone woke me up at 7:15, it was almost a blessing. I reached for it groggily, seeing my mom's number and answering it shakingly. Hello? Honey? Baby, I need you to listen to me for a minute. There's been an accident. Your dad's dead, sweetheart. She sobbed a little before continuing. I sat up quickly, still thinking I was dreaming. What? Turn on the news, honey. It's been all over the news since it happened. I need you to come home right away. I need someone here with me. I told her I would, and she hung up, and as I walked into the living room, switched on the TV, wondering what I would find on the screen. It had been a bus accident that had happened about an hour and a half ago. Dad, the other passengers, and the driver had been killed when another bus had T-boned them at an intersection. The bus Dad had been on had been crushed against the storefront, and the engine had ignited. The ensuing fire had made rescue very difficult. After extinguishing it, emergency services had really only been rescuing bodies. Then they started flashing the pictures of the deceased across the screen, and I felt the remote slip from my hands and clatter on the hardwood. I recognized all of them. They were the faces in the maze. I flopped bonelessly onto the couch, my legs refusing to hold me. I'm curled on the couch now, filled with a deep sense of dread over the knowledge I seemed to possess. Everyone I'd seen in that maze last night was dead now. Everyone except me. I had seen my own contorted face as I lay broken on the floor of that 8-bit maze. If everyone I had seen in there was supposed to die today, why had I seen my picture? I hadn't died. I was still clearly alive. For now. People keep calling me, but all I can do is hunker on the couch and wait. Waiting for my own fate to come and sweep me off the board as well. So if you stumble across this game in your internet travels, do yourself a favor and don't play it. I wish to God I never had. Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's story. If you'd like to support us, I've got a Patreon that I'll link below, or you could buy one of my books on Amazon. I'll put up a link to Stragview Stories, which is my latest book. If you like what you heard, join us every Wednesday for a throwback story, and every Sunday for a brand new story. I hope to see you next week. Dr. Plague, signing off.